September 1941. Tokyo. In the dim light of a small office within the Navy Ministry, a young intelligence officer bends over a stack of reports gathered from embassies, commercial attaches, and open sources in the United States. The numbers are staggering. American steel production in 1940, over 80 million tons. Japanese, less than 7 million. Oil reserves. The United States sits atop oceans of it. Japan has stockpiles for barely 18 months of war. Aircraft factories in California and Michigan alone churn out more frames in a month than all Japanese plants combined. The officer pauses, pencil in hand. He must reduce this vast continent to something the Imperial General Headquarters can comprehend, something that will fit into the columns of a planning table. He writes, estimated American war potential, approximately 10 times that of Japan. He hesitates, then crosses it out. 10 times seems too large, too discouraging for the liaison conferences. He settles on a lower figure, one that will not alarm the Army hotheads or deflate the spirit of victory. The report moves upward through the chain, each level softening the edges further, until the final briefing paper presented to the Emperor's advisors declares with calm assurance that the material strength of the United States is roughly 4 to 5 times that of the Empire. A single transposition of digits, a quiet rounding down, a deliberate understatement to preserve harmony and momentum. One fatal mathematical error, entered in September 1941, now sealed in ink and stamped with a chrysanthemum crest. This was the moment the war was lost. Long before the first zero lifted off the deck of the Akagi, before the torpedoes ran hot in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan had already miscalculated the arithmetic of survival. The planners in Tokyo did not lack data. They lacked the courage to accept what the data screamed. They knew the population of the United States stood at 132 million souls in 1940, nearly double Japan's 73 million. They knew the American gross national product dwarfed theirs by a factor some honest analysts privately admitted approached 20. They knew that behind the neon lights of Hollywood and the isolationist speeches of Charles Lindbergh lay factories that had never truly stopped humming since the armistice of 1918. Yet in room after room, conference after conference, the numbers were bent, folded, and smoothed until they no longer frightened. The Army argued that American soldiers were soft, pampered by refrigerators and Ford automobiles. The Navy insisted that one Japanese pilot was worth 10 Americans. And so the fatal error propagated like a crack in a dam. Small at first, invisible to the eye, but widening with every passing week until the entire structure would collapse beneath the flood. Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, the Harvard-educated gambler who commanded the combined fleet, saw the truth more clearly than most. He had walked the streets of Washington, ridden trains across the endless Midwest, watched assembly lines in Detroit that seemed to stretch to the horizon. In private letters, he warned that Japan could run wild for 6 months, perhaps a year, but after that he had utterly no confidence. Yet even Yamamoto bowed to the momentum. When he threatened to resign unless his audacious plan for Pearl Harbor was adopted, he was not promising victory. He was buying time. Time to seize the oil of the Dutch East Indies, the rubber of Malaya, the rice of Indochina. Time to fortify a defensive perimeter across 10,000 miles of ocean before the American colossus fully awoke. The strike on Hawaii was never intended to destroy the United States Pacific Fleet outright, only to wound it, to delay it, to buy those precious months. The planners calculated that if the American battleships were sunk or crippled at their moorings, the United States would need at least 18 months to recover. 18 months was all the empire required. They never imagined the recovery would take 6. The recurring symbol throughout the Pacific War, the quiet indictment of Japanese miscalculation, was a simple tin, the American ration can. To the Japanese soldier on Guadalcanal or New Guinea, it appeared almost miraculous. Spam, canned peaches, chocolate bars, cigarettes, even soluble coffee, all sealed in bright metal that did not rust in the jungle humidity. Japanese troops carried rice balls wrapped in bamboo leaves, dried squid, and vitamin tablets that tasted of defeat. When they overran a marine dump on some forgotten ridge, they stared in disbelief at the mountains of food, enough to feed a battalion for weeks, casually abandoned because more was already on the way. The C ration became the physical embodiment of American abundance, mass-produced by the tens of millions in factories that never slept, shipped across oceans in convoys that grew longer every month, delivered to men who fought not out of imperial destiny, but because someone had attacked their home on a Sunday morning. Each discarded tin glittering in the mud was a reminder that the arithmetic of 1941 had been catastrophically wrong. In the autumn of 1941, the liaison conferences between Army and Navy reached their fever pitch. On September 6, the final Imperial Conference approved the fateful decision. If negotiations with the United States failed by early October, Japan would go to war. The negotiators in Washington, Admiral Nomura and Special Envoy Kurusu, pleaded for more time, but a deadline was immovable. Behind the scenes, the miscalculation hardened into doctrine. The Army's planning staff produced a document titled Estimate of the World Situation that calmly asserted the United States, distracted by the European War and crippled by internal divisions, would accept a negotiated peace after initial defeats. Racial theories filled the gaps where mathematics should have ruled. Americans were a nation of shopkeepers and Jews, lacking the spiritual resolve of Yamato Damashii. One planning officer dismissed American industrial statistics as Jewish exaggerations. Another argued that the Roosevelt administration would fall within months of the first setbacks. The error of September, that quiet downgrading of American potential from tenfold to fourfold, now justified the entire strategic edifice. November arrived cold and tense. On the 5th, Combined Fleet Top Secret Operation Order No. 1 was issued. The task force assembled in Hitokappa Bay on the frozen northern island of Edarofu. 6 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Zuikaku, Shokaku, swung at anchor under gray skies, their decks crammed with 414 aircraft. Crews were told only that they sailed for special duty. On November 26, the fleet slipped out under radio silence, steering northeast into the empty wastes of the North Pacific. Temperatures plummeted. Waves crashed over the bows and froze into glittering sheets. Pilots huddled in ready rooms, studying recognition charts of Battleship Row, memorizing the silhouettes of Arizona, West Virginia, Oklahoma. They believed they were delivering a knockout blow to a decadent giant that would never rise again. At dawn on December 7th to December 8th Tokyo time, the first wave climbed into the sky. Commander Fukuda Mitsuo, leading the attack, looked down upon a Pearl Harbor still asleep. Torpedoes dropped into the water with gentle splashes that belied their purpose. Bombs fell in perfect intervals. In less than 2 hours, the battleships burned. The harbor became a cauldron of oil and flame, and 2,403 Americans lay dead. Fukuda radioed the code words that rang across the empire like temple bells. Tora, Tora, Tora. Surprise achieved. Tactical masterpiece complete. Yet even as the second wave turned for home, the fatal error revealed its first consequence. The American aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Lexington, Saratoga, were at sea, untouched. The fuel farms and repair yards stood intact. And most crucially, the strike had ignited something the planners in Tokyo had dismissed as impossible. Total, furious, unanimous American rage. Across the United States that Sunday afternoon, radios crackled with the news. In small towns and great cities, men and women who had argued bitterly over Lend-Lease and intervention now line up outside recruiting stations before the doors even open on Monday morning. Shipyard workers in Newport News and Kaiser's new yards in Richmond pledged to forego weekends until a fleet was rebuilt twice over. Farmers in Iowa planted extra acres of soybeans for aviation lubricant. Housewives collected tin cans and bacon grease. The miscalculation of 1941 had assumed a nation divided by ethnicity and politics would fracture under shock. Instead, it fused into something harder than steel. By March 1942, the first new Essex-class carriers were already on the ways. By autumn, the astonishing happened. American factories delivered more aircraft in a single month than Japan would produce in all of 1942. The arithmetic the Tokyo planners had quietly adjusted now asserted itself with brutal clarity. In 1940, the United States had built 6,000 military aircraft. In 1942, 48,000. In 1944, 96,000. Steel production soared past 90 million tons, while Japan struggled to reach 8. Oil flowed from Texas and California in quantities that made the captured fields of Borneo seem trivial. And behind every statistic marched millions of young men who had never known hunger, who arrived in the Pacific carrying ration cans and photographs of girls back home, fighting not for an emperor, but because someone had bombed their fleet on a Sunday morning. The Japanese soldier first encountered the full weight of the error on Guadalcanal. Starving in the jungle, reduced to eating roots and grass, he watched American Marines open tin after tin. Corned beef hash, peaches in heavy syrup, Hershey bars thick as a man's thumb. The sear ration became legend, passed from hand to hand like sacred relics. Captured diaries speak of it with something close to awe. The enemy eats from cans as though they were rice bowls at home. They throw away half and still grow stronger. On New Guinea, on Tarawa, on Saipan, the pattern repeated. Wherever the front moved, the glittering trail of empty tins marked the American advance like breadcrumbs leading to Tokyo. By 1944, the miscalculation had become catastrophe. American submarines, built in number Japan could scarcely imagine, tore the heart out of Japanese merchant shipping. Oil stopped flowing. Factories slowed. Pilots trained for 20 hours instead of 200. Kamikaze emerged not from spiritual purity, but from the brutal realization that only suicide could stretch dwindling resources a little further. B-29s appeared overhead in formations larger than entire Japanese air wings, dropping incendiaries that turned wooden cities into infernos. And still the ration cans arrived on distant islands, carried ashore by men who fought with a grim efficiency the planners of 1941 had declared impossible. On August 6, 1945, a single bomb fell on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another on Nagasaki. The empire that had staked everything on a fatal mathematical error surrendered unconditionally aboard the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Emperor Hirohito's broadcast to his people spoke of a new type of bomb that had made further resistance impossible, but the truth was older and simpler. The war had been decided 4 years earlier in a quiet Tokyo office when a young officer, pencil trembling slightly, wrote down a number smaller than the truth. In the end, the empire of the rising sun was not destroyed by atomic fire alone. It was drowned beneath an ocean of American steel, fueled by rivers of oil, fed by mountains of wheat and corn, carried forward on the backs of people who discovered, in the smoke over Pearl Harbor, that abundance is not weakness, but the most terrible strength of all. The ration can, rusting now on forgotten battlefields from Attu to Okinawa, stands as a quiet monument to that revelation. Empty, dented, ordinary. Yet each one once held the proof that arithmetic, when honest, is merciless, and that a single lie written in ink in September 1941 could doom an empire more surely than any fleet or army ever could. Freedom is not merely the absence of chains. It is the presence of choices, of food enough to share, of factories that build homes as readily as weapons, of a people who, when struck, do not shatter but multiply. The Japanese planners of 1941 looked across the Pacific and saw only distance. They never understood that what separated them from their enemy was not ocean but arithmetic, the vast, inexorable, democratic arithmetic of a free people awakened. In that miscalculation lay their doom, and in its correction, the salvation of the world.